That's absolutely fine. Thanks very much. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to start with an apology, actually. I've got a bit of a sore throat today, which hopefully isn't some horrible harbinger of things to come. So apologies if I sound slightly husky and have to keep having a drink every now and then. So at AELP, the green and sustainability agenda has been at the forefront of our minds for some time now. I'm particularly pleased to be working so closely with NOCN on this agenda as well, not only through this invitation to speak today, but also through Graham Hastings-Evans' acceptance of the role as chair on our advisory group, which oversees AELP's activities in the green arena on our commercial offer and our work plan to make sure that we're constantly doing all that we can to promote the sustainability and green agenda in our own offering, both within our own organisation and in the content, the services and resources that we offer externally as well. We're really pleased to have NOCN supporting us in this, so very many thanks to Graham and his team for agreeing to help us. Now, as some of you may know, hopefully you were there, we held our own Green Skills event in London in February of this year, which was generally agreed to have been a tremendous success. We'll be repeating it again this year, again with NOCN support, which we're really pleased about. And I think I'm right in saying it resulted in a lot of people going away asking questions really of their own understanding of the term green skills. What are they exactly? What are these green jobs of sort of which we sometimes so glibly speak? Now, green skills is one of those terms where everyone thinks they know what they are until you ask them to define it, at which point quite a lot of people can get a little bit tongue-tied because they begin to realise that they're not exactly sure. This isn't a criticism of anybody by any means. Almost everybody does it to one extent or another. Now, there have been some attempts to define it, of course. The United Nations say that green skills are the knowledge, abilities, values and attitudes needed to live in, develop and support a sustainable and resource efficient society. Now, my personal problem with that is that it's a bit all encompassing. It's effectively anything you know or do that could be construed as sympathetic to the broad green agenda. And from our perspective in FE and skills, I don't think that really helps us to figure out what skills we should therefore be teaching, or why, or how, or what specific purpose they're going to be put to. The Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, IEMA, say that green skills is a broad term used to refer to the technical skills, knowledge, behaviours and capabilities required to tackle the environmental challenges that we face. Now, when you look at that particular wording, that's not actually that much different to the UN's, and it therefore suffers the same sort of deficits. However, the IEMA go on to point out that while specific jobs and roles might not be directly framed in terms of delivering sustainable or environmental outcomes, they are nonetheless capable of contributing to those outcomes. And for me, that's beginning to get a little closer to what it is we're talking about. You see, I'm not really sure there is really such a thing as a green skill in terms of a skill that has emerged purely on the basis of its ability to formulate or build or manufacture or create a greener society full of green things. Because if you say that there is something called green skills, you are by inference saying that there is something else that is not a green skill. And when you think about it, I reckon you would be hard pushed to find a skill that could only ever be turned to polluting purposes and nothing else. In the same sort of vein, we struggle with green jobs as well. What is a green job as opposed to any other job? Even the government's Green Jobs Task Force have struggled here. They say that green jobs were used to signify employment in an activity that directly contributes to or indirectly supports the achievement of the UK's net zero emissions target and other environmental goals, such as nature restoration and mitigation against climate risks. Now, offhand, people tend to think that green jobs might be, for example, something to do with wind turbines. But when you look at the supply chain for that, what does it actually involve? Now, I know very little about the detail of wind turbines, so if we've got any wind turbine manufacturers on here that feel compelled to correct me, please do. But in general terms, I would imagine that it may involve a steel plant somewhere that produces a load of steel that gets put on a lorry and taken to a manufacturing plant of some description where it gets assembled, and then it gets put on another lorry and driven to a port where a crane puts it on a ship which sails off into the sea, and lots of engineers and divers crawl over it, putting it into place and linking it up to the national grid. It's all very commendable, but it's not exactly the brave new world of the future, is it? Much the same story could have been told about a supply chain for building oil rigs, which, despite all the recent announcements by the government, are possibly not as de rigueur as they might once have been. So in that little scenario of wind turbine building that I just outlined, I don't think I can think of any job or skill in there that wouldn't have been done in building and transporting an oil rig. So is it only a green job when it's put to the purpose of producing a green output? And until that point, it isn't a green job. So does the green nature of a green skill or green job depend on the output? And it's nothing to do actually with the skill itself. Now, as another example, I recently listened to Ruth Scarrett from the National Federation of Roofing Contractors talk about how she was formulating a strategy to attract new blood into the roofing industry. Now, she was aware, of course, as we all are, that green considerations can play very well with young people, with many being very attracted to the prospect of work that contributes positively to the sustainability agenda. But how do you do that when the stereotypical public perception of your trade consists of slightly rough types clambering over your roof and drinking tea? So she went down this route of green outputs, that the skills you'll get taught as a roofing contractor are directly related, for example, to the installation of solar panels. Your abilities in constructing rafters and laying coverings on roofs and ensuring that they are watertight are much the same as those that are needed to install roof gardens. And incidentally, I was speaking to Chris Oldham, a previous speaker, a little bit earlier this week, and that sort of work is absolutely key to what's going on in the City of London at the moment as well. How do you better use roofs in order to get a sustainability and green agenda moving forward? You do it by using actually a lot of the skills that you already have. Now, you'll probably be relieved to know that my input here isn't just going to be a 20-minute discussion of semantics or just picking holes in other people's attempts to find something, particularly because I don't really have any better definitions to offer. But I do think it's a valid discussion to have, to look at the actual phraseology that we use to communicate what we think we all know but don't, although that's not where I'm going in this instance. What I'm really concerned about is the perception that green jobs and green skills are something other than existing jobs and existing skills. There shouldn't be an otherness about any of this. It's understandable that we do it when we begin to move into any sort of new phase, but it's not sustainable, if you forgive the pun, and it's not helpful if your intent is to actually to rapidly embed or normalize whatever it is you're talking about. Now, if you think back to the late 90s, the early noughties, when the FE sector was getting very excited about the prospects of online and remote learning and constructed the University for Industry, UFI, later Learn Direct, to oversee the rollout of it. Excuse me, even during the later noughties, getting on towards 2010. AELP itself was still very involved in this. We were handling what were at that time were termed learning innovation grants on behalf of the old Learning and Skills Council to generate ideas on how to use this technology in the delivery of work-based learning. Now, certainly it all contributed to beginning to get people to look at the question, but it was slow. It was an other. It was treated as a delivery mechanism that was sort of over there somewhere, and in a box under the bed that occasionally it would get hauled out and we'd all have a look at it and then we'd put it away again if it was a bit too difficult. Meanwhile, technology, of course, was slowly but surely taking over just about every aspect of the rest of our lives, and we didn't really properly link it up with the potential for it in our sector and what we were doing, because in my view, we had othered it. Now, I remember a few years before COVID, we had an internal meeting at AELP where we discussed whether we should use Skype for senior management team meetings rather than all traipsing from all over the country to Travelodge in Wiltshire or wherever it was we used to meet up. I remember we tried it once and we had the difficulties that you might have expected and that we've all encountered. You know, it's the slightly dodgy connections. Where's the mute button? Why is my picture upside down? That, you know, that sort of thing. But as a result, it never really took off until lockdown forced us to sort it out. Now, as it turned out, I think we could probably all agree that the biggest single shift in the use of technology in our sector came about when we discovered that there was a new virus rampant and we all had to work at home for about a year. And we suddenly discovered it wasn't another thing after all. It was actually in there. It was on our computers. We could already do it. We were just had to be pushed into understanding that that's what it was and get on and do it. Now it's pretty much indispensable for just about every meeting we have, one way or the other, including, of course, this one. We've recognised, because we were forced to, how technology is already in what we do, and we have finally embraced it. Now, all too often, we still see or hear high-profile figures sort of denigrating or disregarding an interest in the green and sustainability agenda as some form of virtue signalling. Now, particularly in the very polarised political world we have at the moment, this tactic gets used to put down views or ideas being expressed that you don't happen to like or agree with. It tries to portray an interest in it as somehow being self-serving or a superficial act that becomes easier to dismiss because of its identification as an other. So actually, we need to be careful going forward how we frame these discussions, because having a Green Skills Summit, as both AELP and NOC have done, infers that you know what green skills are. And as I said, I'm not yet really sure that we do. It sounds strange that, like I'm having a pop at the host, which I'm really not, honestly. I just think it's really important that all of us should quickly come to establish what it is we're actually talking about, so we can formulate how to present them, how to talk about them, how to deliver them, how to embed them in the natural order of things. Now, from that perspective, I don't think that should be overly difficult, because pretty much what we're talking about for the most part are skills that we already know about that get turned to formulate a sustainable output. Now, inevitably, there will, of course, be some new jobs that we probably haven't thought of yet as technology and awareness progresses. I mean, who'd ever heard of a software engineer or a video games designer when I was a kid in the 70s? Well, certainly not me anyway. But right now, in the place we are now, we shouldn't get seduced into thinking that the green agenda is just about heralding a whole range of new skills and technology that we've never heard of before. You know, building and servicing an electric car might require some variations and adaptations to existing skill paradigms, but actually, before you get to that bit, you have to build the factory, you have to build the machines, you have to create the tools, you have to fit the place out, all of which are going to involve, for the most part, pretty traditional skills needs before you can sit down and think, right, let's get on and build this massive car battery then. So, in case anyone is labouring under the misapprehension that I think I've stumbled on a great thought that nobody else has previously thought before, I'm absolutely not claiming that. It's noticeable that in a lot of the documents that have been produced on this subject in the last few years, when you really look into it, the wording reflects this. For example, the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution does indeed set ambitious targets for jobs between now and 2030, but it does so by talking in terms of sustainable projects delivering support for jobs rather than green jobs or such like. For example, they say that advancing offshore wind could deliver support for up to 60,000 jobs in 2030, and they say that decarbonising public transport could deliver up to 3,000 jobs by 2025. The IFATE have talked about convening employers to deliver 12 new occupations, but actually most of their work is about aligning and mapping existing standards to a new green action plan moving forward. So my issue really is that I don't think that yet enough of our own sector has quite caught up with the nuances of what we're talking about when we talk about green skills and the green agenda in general. I still feel that there are too many out there who think that when we're talking about green skills and green jobs, they may be inadvertently maintaining this sense of otherness about it by assuming that building wind turbines consists entirely of some set of new skills that have never been used before, or they haven't twigged that installing solar panels often involves fixing them onto a roof using the same sort of techniques that you might use if you were fixing anything else to a roof. My issue, therefore, is that we have to get out of that trap, or our sector will never be able to support the economy in the way we should and in the way that we want to. If we don't use the correct language to understand all these issues in front of us, we can't hope to resolve them properly. It's actually a sort of a George Orwell way of thinking, actually. In his novel in 1984, the language Newspeak was designed to limit thought by removing words that describe certain concepts. And we're in danger of treading a little bit of a similar path. If we don't properly understand what we mean when we say green skills or green jobs, we risk missing the target when it comes to devising and delivering the training that is needed to support them. In supporting the green and sustainability agenda, our sector has a huge amount to offer. It's got a really important role to play. It's not just about recognising which existing skills can be turned to new purposes, which I guess has been the major thrust of what I've said so far. But it's also about looking to see how existing skills and knowledge can be adapted to support the overall agenda. For example, in something like cleaning, now, you don't need a new skill in order to have an awareness of the use of sustainable cleaning products, or an awareness on how the use of chemicals that you use in the process of your job could affect the environment. Those aren't new skills, but they might be considered as new knowledge and behaviours. I'm not an expert in retail by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe there is a need for merchandising departments to think more about whether the lighting they use for displays is energy saving, or whether they really need to leave great swathes of their store lit up all night when it's shut. And therefore, perhaps those behaviours, that knowledge, needs to be built into much more explicitly into the standards that we deliver when we're training those individuals. Perhaps leadership, management and business administration, the training delivery for it needs to think a little bit more proactively about how to create paperless offices. Now, I'm very glad to say, I'm very proud to say actually, that AELP has been largely paperless since I started many years ago now. But I still find it surprising that so many other organisations, including, to their shame in my opinion actually, the big public corporations, have yet to twig that paper doesn't need to be essential, because if a relatively little company like ours can do it, why can't they? Now, I don't think I need to ram home the importance of this agenda to the economy or to society at large. I think most people are already on board with that. I do think, however, that there is still some work to do in persuading some people that they have a role to play. And in part, the way to do that is by ensuring that the message is clear, and fundamentally that we know what we are talking about when we say things. We have to break down this sense of otherness about the agenda by making sure we communicate that green skills and green jobs are not necessarily a thing in themselves. They can be, but not always. But actually, we are probably mostly talking about how the skills you have and the existing skills that you can learn, skills that are already out there in the wild, can be used to deliver green outputs. They can be used to contribute to environmental ends. Now, by ensuring that, we potentially hit on a way to help mitigate a number of issues, not only to drive the green agenda onward, but also to help to attract and retain young people and a new workforce to occupations that may be being overlooked somewhat in the attention-grabbing headlines of electric cars and tidal power projects. We shouldn't be afraid to say that just because you're window dressing in a department store and not building a hydrogen heating plant doesn't mean that your role hasn't got an important part to play in helping us to achieve all of this. So in summary, I think this is about communication. Many, if not most, if not all of the people in this meeting, in this virtual room, will have already twigged the points that I've been making already without me having to make them. But we can't fall into what is always a dangerous trap of assuming that just because we know something, then so does everybody else. For very good reasons, I believe this message is not sufficiently out there yet. So we have a number of roles to play, therefore, to make sure that we do our part in communicating the message in a way that resonates. And of course, crucially, ensuring that the work that we do as a sector then lives up to the expectations that we will have worked so hard to build up. I hope that's given you something to think about. Quite happy to answer any questions if there are any, or if you want to get in touch with me at any point. Obviously, pwarner@aelp.org.uk. I'll put my email in the website. In the chat pane, you're more than welcome to make contact. But that will do me for the moment. I'll hand back for now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.